Are we ready to begin? Was everybody just waiting for me?
No, we're just waiting for the live stream to start.
Oh, okay. My apologies for being a couple of minutes late or very last minute here.
Okay, I'm calling to order this special meeting of council. First, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Snawas First Nation. First item on the agenda is adoption agenda. I'll just make the motion that the November 9th, 2022 special council meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Is there a second? A second by Councillor Savage. Discussion on the agenda. Okay, hearing seeing nothing, I will move to calling the question. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. That takes us on to item 3 of our agenda. So under legislative matters. Sorry, my pen's all got the thing on the end of it. Under legislative matters, we have the overview of the District of Lantzville budget and recap of the 2022 budget. For information, we have Director Hare this evening with us to present, and I believe is there going to be a PowerPoint presentation with this as well, or is it just?
Yes, Your Worship, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment.
Okay, so through to you, Director Hare, and then in terms of questions throughout the presentation, Director Hare, would you prefer to take them as they come up or at the end?
I prefer to take them at the end. I'd like to get through the presentation, and then if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them. And if you don't think of questions right today, you can always email them to me, and I'd be happy to respond.
Okay, good. That's what we'll do. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here with you. So do you is my screen shared?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. So, Your Worship, through you to the rest of Council, the following slides in this presentation are intended to provide Council with an overview and orientation to the budget process today. It's a recap of the report to Council that's included in this evening's agenda. And the purpose of the presentation and the report is to help the newly elected Council understand the various components of the budget and provide context in reviewing and understanding the budget materials that will be distributed on Monday, December the 14th.
I think that's November the 13th or 14th.
14th, rather,
yeah,
yes.
No
My apologies on that. Hold on just a quick sec. I'm having trouble navigating my slides here. Bear with me for just. Okay, did the slide change on your screen there?
Well, I think we have legislative requirement.
Legislative requirement, okay. So,
and then it just jumped one. So, there we go. That's looks like your first slide.
I'm just trying to fix something funny is going on here. Oh my gosh, because that's not my, oh, you know what? Sorry, my apologies. I got the wrong presentation up. I'm just going to unshare. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, go to the right presentation. My apologies. Oh my gosh. (2023) financial plan. Okay, I'm going to share my screen once again. And slideshow. Okay, now you have the right presentation in front of you. So my apologies on that.
Okay, so we don't have the screen shared at the moment.
Pardon?
There's no screen sharing at the moment.
Oh, thought I had shared it with. Oh, bear with me for just a quick sec. Oh, I just forgot to hit the share button. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, we're in business. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, I just gave you the objectives of the presentation, and essentially the following slides will illustrate an overview of the financial plan or the municipal budget, the long-term challenges facing the District of North Vancouver. So ones I'm going to talk about are the residential tax base, or the composition of the residential tax base, asset management and infrastructure funding, policing services, and the impact of the tax increase to the average property in the long run. So the municipal budget is comprised of the general fund and the water fund and sewer funds. The general fund includes the services of municipal government, such as transportation planning, building permits, administration, finance, parks, streets, and boulevard maintenance. The general fund also includes services for fire and bylaw compliance and legislative services. The cost of providing these services is funded through a combination of user fees, grants, and property taxes, with property taxes being the largest funding source for these expenditures. The water and sewer funds are each standalone utilities, and expenditures and contributions to reserves are fully funded in these funds through user fees and parcel taxes. Each of the funds has an operating budget and a capital budget. So the operating budget includes the day-to-day expenses of running the municipality. So this includes items such as salaries and benefits, materials and supplies, insurance, utility costs, professional and contractor services. The operating budget also includes an annual contribution to reserves, which are used to fund the capital budget. And then over on the right-hand side here, the capital budget is essentially for services provided. Capital budget service. So services provided in the operating budget, So the capital budget includes expenditures on assets which are used to provide services. So this includes things such as road rehabilitation, replacement of larger equipment, replacement of vehicles, trail structures, and infrastructure as such. Local governments must annually adopt a financial plan in accordance with the Community Charter and the Local Government Act. The planning period must include the current fiscal year and the next 4 years. The plan must include proposed expenditures, funding sources, and transfers to and from reserve funds. Municipalities cannot purposely budget for an operating surplus. Revenue should only be collected if there is an associated expense in the financial plan. So that being said, the budget may provide for reserve fund contributions, that is, contributions to reserves for capital or asset management, and to reserves for operating expenses that occur on an irregular basis. For example, an annual contribution for the election, which occurs every 4 years. The long-term financial planning processes ensure financial resilience and is essential for meeting community needs, ensuring quality of life over time, and continually balancing services and affordabilities. The major components and timing of the financial process are summarized in this illustration here. So the operating budget projections and capital plan development starts in July or August. One of the first activities in the process is the permissive tax exemption review and the approval of the property tax exemption bylaw. Then in the fall, a financial plan amendment is done to update the current financial plan to reflect changes that have taken place during the year that were not reflected in the financial plan. The operating plans and capital plans and draft budget for the upcoming year and the subsequent 4 years are prepared in the fall and presented to council for deliberation and approval. Public consultation comprised of presentation of the budget materials to the public to provide an opportunity for residents to review and comment and pose questions is also done in conjunction with presenting the budget to council for consideration. So as I'd mentioned earlier, property taxes are the largest source of funding for the operating budget. Just over 1/3 of property taxes on the annual property tax bill that residents see in June go towards funding the municipal budget. So that's the blue section there, the 38%. The remaining 2/3 are collected on behalf of other taxing authorities and remitted to them. The municipality is legislatively required to collect these and has no control over setting these taxes. So when we're talking about the municipal budget, we are talking about only those property taxes that are collected to pay for municipal services provided by the District of Lantzville. The lower slide illustrates how the municipal taxes collected are spent. So 36% of the taxes that we collect go to reserves, primarily for capital renewal and replacement. 18% goes to general government activities. So that's for things like administration, legislative services, common costs to government activities, such as insurance and auditing. 23% goes towards transportation and roads maintenance, parks and trails maintenance, culvert maintenance, and other public works activities. 15% goes towards fire and bylaws and protective services, and 8% goes towards planning and development activities. So this slide right here shows the residential component of the tax base for Lantzville and two of the other comparative municipalities in the Nanaimo Regional District. As you can see from here, 97% of the assessment base in Lantzville is residential. Thus, Lantzville has a very small commercial and industrial tax base. Property taxes for commercial and industrial properties are usually much higher than those for the residential class. So in communities with a large commercial and industrial tax base, taxes paid by this class subsidize taxes to the residential class. So when you look at this illustration, even though the 97% of the assessment base in Lantzville is residential, 86% of the property taxes are collected from the residential tax base. So what I'm trying to convey in this slide is that the cost of having little or no industry is comparatively higher residential tax rates. In a community such as Parksville, a lower percentage of the tax revenues collected for the residential class due to the higher commercial and industrial tax base in that municipality. In Lantzville, residential taxes are lower in relation to the composition of the tax base. Thus, there is comparatively lower funding available for local government expenses in Lantzville. As you can see from here, in Qualicum, an average property assessed at $866,000 pays $2,000 in residential property taxes, whereas a property assessed at the average property assessed at $1,033,000 in Lantzville pays $1,600 in municipal taxes. So next challenge for local government District of Lantzville is asset management, contributions to reserves. So asset management is focused on the life cycle maintenance and renewal and replacement of municipal assets. Assets are used to provide services. So if assets are not properly maintained and replaced at their appropriate or optimal point, services are impacted. Municipal efforts on asset management not only impact services that the municipality can provide, but are to a very strong degree being scrutinized by other levels of government and strongly impact grant awarding decisions. Asset management practices have been evolving over time, and it's critical that the municipality keeps up with current practices. The district adopted an asset management policy in 2019, and that will also be included with the budget materials that are going to be distributed on the 14th. One of the largest challenges across most municipalities is in addressing what's called the infrastructure funding deficit. So the infrastructure funding deficit represents a gap between the annual investment or contributions to reserves required in comparison to the actual contributions to reserves to ensure long-term sustainability and life cycle maintenance of district assets. This slide shows that required spending on the maintenance and renewal of district assets over the next 20 years. Spending varies from year to year. However, on average, over the life cycle of existing assets, just over $1.4 million per year should be contributed to life cycle renewal reserves. That's the orange line that's going across the top, and that's an averaging out of the annual spending over the long run. This amount of contribution to reserves would ensure that over the long run, adequate funding is in place for renewal and replacement of assets. The current level of contributions to assets is just over $1 million, and that's the blue line going across the graph. The difference between the orange and blue lines of $433,000 represents the annual infrastructure funding gap. As long as contributions to reserves remain below the required average annual life cycle investments, contributions to reserves will be insufficient to renew and replace assets, which would result in deferring renewal or maintenance of assets. This will increase the risk of failure of assets and disruption of services, and also place the burden of addressing the deficit to future generations. This will also result in an overall higher cost of repairs because you'll be doing emergency repairs last minute, in contrast to if asset renewal or replacement takes place at the optimal or appropriate time. Next challenge we have in terms of the long term for budgeting is for policing services. The 2021 reported population is just over 3,800. Once the population of the municipality reaches 5,000, municipalities become responsible for the cost of policing. Based on population growth projections, the population of Lantzville is probably not expected to reach the 5,000 mark until about 2045. I know that seems a long ways off, but annual costs are projected to be about $1.5 million per year at that time. And Lantzville currently does not have a strategy in place to address this cost when it becomes a reality. Proper planning and a long-term strategy is required to address this challenge to build up the annual funding amount that will be required to address policing costs when the municipality becomes responsible for them. So in 2023, the impact of a 1% increase in the property tax rate to the owner of a Lantzville residential property assessed at the 2022 average value of $1,033,000 will be about $16 per year. A 1% tax rate is equivalent to an additional $30,700 increase in revenue. Municipalities commonly compare the property tax increase in their municipality to other municipalities. So one thing that it's important to keep in mind is a 1% increase in Lantzville can't be compared like apples to apples with other jurisdictions. This is because our tax base is smaller. So essentially, for example, a 1% increase in the neighboring municipality in Nanaimo would generate over $1.3 million of additional revenue. In comparison, a 1% increase in Lantzville would only generate a total of $30,700 in additional revenue, as I'd mentioned in the previous slide. So there's quite a difference between what 1.3 million can fund over what $30,000 would be able to fund. And the next steps today's presentation was just an introduction to the budget. Next steps in the budget process will be on November 14th. The budget binders will be distributed to council. So council will have approximately 9 days to review them before discussion on the budget starts. Then at the November 23rd meeting, there'll be discussion on the budget and council deliberation and direction from council to staff on how to proceed. We have scheduled the November 28th meeting for a public input session, following which there'll be further deliberation on the budget by council and hopefully first, second, and third readings on the financial plan bylaw. And December 7th is essentially right now a plan for adoption of the financial plan bylaw if first 3 readings happen on November the 28th. And that concludes my presentation on the introduction on the budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Director Hare, for your presentation. Just the first thing to confirm is, and this is fairly typical, the slides from your presentation will be available to council?
Yes, I believe they will be.
Okay. Thank you. And I just had one real brief comment, and then we'll open up to the rest of council. I was actually quite surprised about Qualcomm's numbers. 96% of their tax base is residential, and then resulting in basically the 90% of the total tax revenues being collected from residential. And the reason why I say I'm quite surprised is because when you go into Qualicum Beach, there appears to be a very vibrant downtown, um, you know, markets and stores and restaurants. Is very vibrant, and I enjoy going to Qualicum, and for that very reason. And so I was actually quite surprised to see that they're still quite heavily dependent on residential taxation there. So I guess it's probably due to the fact that maybe there's a lack of industrial and or light industrial and properties that also generate tax revenue. So I don't know if you looked into that any further, Director Hare, or if that was just thrown into the presentation for a general comparison.
The numbers that I retrieved were from the provincial website on taxation statistics. I didn't have the resources to go further into exploring the composition there. And like you said, they could have varying rates for their business sector. So some municipalities, for example, the business class is separate from an industrial class. So it could be that they provide, I don't know the answer to this, but they may keep their taxes low for their business class to attract businesses.
Yeah, fair enough. It was just kind of surprising because when you compare it to our situation in Lantzville, 97% of our taxes coming from residential. Or sorry, 86% would be collected from residential. Yeah, I was just quite surprised because we don't have that as much, in our downtown core area in terms of restaurants and stores and shops and so forth. But we have a half decent, in my opinion, industrial park, and hopefully we'll see some growth within it now that phase 3 sewers in there. Anyways, those are just some general comments. And through to the rest of the council, any specific questions for Director here? Go ahead, Councillor Lerner, and then Councillor Jones.
Sure. First, I want to thank you so much for the presentation. It was very insightful. I wanted to just have a question because you mentioned comparing apples to apples with Nanaimo and others. And you mentioned the 1% increase in Nanaimo cost, generating $1.3 million in revenue, whereas a 1% increase in Lantzville would generate $30,700. I'm wondering how that compares to costs as well, in the sense that, yes, it only generates $30,700, but we have 3,800 people to service in the community, whereas their 1.3 million has to serve over 100,000. So I'm wondering, if we want to compare apples to apples, what the analysis would be in a 1% cost increase.
Yeah, we'd have to take a look at the pressures of, essentially, the revenues are quite different, and the expenditure streams will also be quite different. So it's difficult for me to say what the pressure expenditures in Nanaimo would be in comparison to their revenues. We'd have to take a look. So there are other factors that come in as well. So I had just addressed the issue of comparing a 1% to 1% and an apples to apples comparison. However, service levels will come into play because definitely service levels impact expenditures. So Nanaimo has recreation centers and recreation staff and all kinds of costs that we don't have. So fair comment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Just a question, but I'll let other people ask some more before I ask others. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Director Hare, for that. I also have a few questions, but I'm just going to ask one now so that we can kind of move around with this. Just a little clarification. I wasn't totally understanding the relationship between some numbers. So on page 2 in table 1, reserve contributions are listed at $1,102,900. And that number is not the same as on page 3, asset reserves, which are stated at $1,007,300. So I'm just missing something here. I am sure they're not meant to be the same, but would you mind explaining the difference between them, just because they're both
Yes, the
asset reserves?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to council. The difference happens to be the contribution to operating reserves. So we make an annual contribution to the election, and then we draw down on the reserve every fourth year. Last year, council also approved a $50,000 annual contribution for operating projects. So that was included in the costs in the table with the financial numbers in comparison, so it wouldn't show up in the contribution to asset reserves. And there's a couple of other smaller things. So basically, any contributions to non-capital reserves for asset replacement, it accounts for the difference.
Thank you. And further to that, are you able to say what what these operating reserves were that additional funds went to?
So I mentioned two of them. One is we have a reserve set up for election costs. So we contribute an even amount every year and then every fourth year we withdraw from it to fund the election. And the other one is set up for operating projects. It was just established last year. So it had an initial contribution of $50,000. And so every municipality must carry out operating projects from time to time. And so the concept there was we would put $50,000 a year into that reserve. In some years, the project requirements may be less, in other years they may be higher, but we would have a funding source to fund those, as opposed to dipping into accumulated surplus or what was done here in the past. Before I started, I believe they were called special projects. And if you had a whole number of them, it would cause you to require more funding and have a higher requisition of the taxpayers. So rather than having swings going up and down, I proposed we establish a reserve for operating projects. So you would have basically, it wouldn't impact year to year property tax rates to fund projects. So operating projects would be things like, for example, studies that need to be done and which we don't have a budget for. For example, you will see when you receive the budget materials in the upcoming year, there's several studies that council had suggested staff carry out in the next budget year, one being a review of the DCCs, the other being, I believe, heron nests, and a number of others as well. And all of those those are the kind of things that would be funded out of such a reserve.
Thank you.
Okay, additional members of council, first time speakers. All right, well, okay, go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, so for me, the way forward is to maximize income, minimize expenses. And I've got a few items here, Director Hare, if you're welcome to add to them if you can think of any, but we have a $400,000 income. Don't know if it's public yet. We can increase the mill rate on forestry land. I'd like to find out the maximum we could do that. And new income from new development like the foothills is somewhat of a windfall, the foothills is. Now the new LED street lights, there could be hydro savings, but Hydro told me we need the lower wattage lights for the big savings. So is it possible, Director Hare, at some point to get a summary of the old lights, a year of that hydro income versus now that they've all been switched, a full year of the new street lights to see what sort of savings are there? And there's certain district land we could develop for housing for a big profit. I'll leave it at that for now. And we've also got $9,100 cash amenity from each foothills unit built. That's going to be a steady income. We have lots of DCCs coming in, and the remainder of the around 1.3 million COVID grant, if there's anything left. So can you think of anything else to add to that, Director Hare, in terms of?
Well, the budget is a collaborative effort, and all of staff look at first maximizing any revenue that can come in, and they look at any opportunity to reduce expenses. So the budget materials that you will receive on Monday, staff has gone through that exercise. If you have specific questions or concerns, I would urge you to email them to me, and I can follow up with the appropriate director to see if they have done that. So I don't create the budget all on my own. It is a collaborative effort of all the directors looking into areas that they are responsible for, and then I bring it all together. So if you have specific concerns or suggestions for staff on what if you think we have missed something, or you think we could incorporate something, if you could put it into an email and send it to us, we'd be happy to address it.
Yes, I do that every year.
Okay.
So anyway, with that, I was just wondering off the top of your head, we have a very rosy income picture coming up that I listed. Can you think of anything else off the top of your head that's going to be unusual and nice thing to receive upcoming?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. It would have been nice if we could have had ongoing income sources. From what I can see, we have very limited new income opportunities. If we did, we would incorporate them into the budget so that taxes are a last resort of addressing the difference between the ongoing expenditures and revenues.
All right, thank you. And then the second thing is I generally do not look for taxes for increasing taxes for different things. For example, I believe it was 10% of the new development income going towards park infrastructure and so on. And there was also talk of a portion of new development income going to a police cost reserve, something I've been talking about for years. However, there are other ways to look at it, and that is to review our amenity policy, and our 3,000 per lot is far too low. So we could be looking at increasing our cash amenities from new development to fund such things as police cost reserve, because it's the new development that's going to be causing us the big increase. So, and the last quick thing is each year for the past 4 years, it's been in the low 20s, like 20,000, 21,000. And last year it was $24,100 for each 1% tax increase. Is there a reason why you're projecting it's going way up to 30,700 this year? Because we haven't done the budget yet. We don't quite know what it will be.
The 1% tax, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Savage, the 1% tax rate is based on the existing property taxes. So last year, there was a substantial increase in property tax revenue. The lion's share of that, as I had mentioned in my report, was due to the asset reserve replenishing the contribution to asset reserves that was used to provide taxpayers with a tax break during the COVID year. And that led to the large increase in taxation. So that 30,700 has nothing to do with the 2023 budget. That is 1% of the 2022 property taxes. So yes, there was a substantial increase in property taxes last year, and that is why the 1% has jumped from I can't remember if it was exactly 24,100, but the 25,000 mark to 30,000.
Gotcha. So the 24,000 was just a snapshot in time. It ended up being 3,700. Thank you.
No, the 24,000 was 1% of the 2021 taxes, and the 30,000 is 1% of the 2022 property taxes.
Yeah.
Okay, additional questions? Go ahead, Councillor Lerner.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to staff, to the director. I had a couple questions about projections related to upcoming development, because I know recently both the Foothills, some development was approved, as well as the Clark Med area. So I'm wondering whether you can speak to how commercial space that was approved in the foothills will affect the percentage of tax over the next 5-year plan that is collected from commercial space versus residential. The mayor mentioned the potential growth of industrial land with the connection of services, as well as the policing. And I am particularly curious about the policing reaching 5,000 in 2045, because if I look at the 10-year development agreements on those properties, we would reach 5,000 population in 10 years, not 23. So I just wanted to understand how the 2045 came about. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I'll take your questions one at a time. I believe the first one was related to non-market change or new construction. So non-market change or new construction is based on actual construction activity, which BC assessment goes out and assesses. So the plans for the commercial space will not impact those assessments, because that is property that has not been approved and that construction is not underway. So each year, non-market change or new construction is based on the assessed value of new construction in the assessment base. The projection, the 2045 population projections are based on a combination of historical growth, average historical growth, and recent growth, essentially. So we could reach the 5,000 mark. You are correct. Depending on how aggressive we are with development, that 5,000 mark could be reached earlier than 2045. However, if population growth occurs at what has been occurring at in recent years, we anticipate it would reach the 2004. It would reach that mark in 2045.
Excellent, thank you. I had one follow-up question with regard to the service level maintenance on page 5 of the agenda, where there was the table 3 expenditure increases and impact on property taxes 2022. Service level maintenance, it mentioned that, above that, where council directed staff to replace the property taxes in asset management reserves with funding of COVID-19 grant. So if I understand correctly, in 2021, there was some relief through the COVID grant. Then in 2022, that 12% was that cost coming back. And if that's correct, then it's already come back at 12%. It's not expected to jump 12% again every year.
Yes, you are correct. And just to provide clarification, I wasn't here at the time, but my understanding is in 2021, initially, council had reduced contributions to reserves by that $312,000. And subsequent to making that decision, the COVID funding of $1.2 million had come into the municipality. And because that contribution to reserves was cut back due to COVID, so essentially, originally, taxpayers were given a break of $312,000 by reducing the contribution to reserves. Then what we ended up doing when the grant funds came in, they're a one-time funding source. They were used to restore that $312,000 contribution in 2021. And then when 2022 came along, you could no longer use the grant. So either you had to cut your contributions to reserves back by that $300,000, or to maintain them, you had to increase taxes.
Okay, excellent. So just to make sure I understand then, so that 12% was a pretty huge jump. That was essentially reestablishing that contribution that was previously missing for that year.
That is exactly correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, additional questions? Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Director Hare. Communities, Nanaimo, Parksville, many others are starting to look at natural assets and to integrate them into their asset management systems. So, for example, natural assets would be things like woodlands, wetlands, creeks, fields, soil, that kind of thing. And communities, many are now identifying their natural assets, valuing them, and accounting for them in their financial planning. The goal being that maintaining a natural asset and using it can be considerably less expensive, potentially saving a community considerable amount of money. My question to you is, are you currently assessing our natural assets? Have you got a program for this coming up soon? What is your plan in this direction?
So currently, to be on, I've heard about, I mean, have heard that about natural assets as well, and you need resources to be able to account for them. We currently have no plans, and we don't have available resources to be able to account for them. We definitely plan to look into doing that in the future. I think we need to enhance our asset management practices for our tangible assets before we jump to natural assets. So we need to learn to walk before we run. We do have a grant application in. There's substantial funding available for asset management practices. So we basically have an application in to review our asset management plans and have proper plans done, and to essentially improve and assess the condition and risk information. And after that, I would say we definitely would like to go towards natural assets and incorporating natural assets into our asset management practices. But currently, we do not have any plans or any timelines to be able to do that within.
Thank you.
Okay, additional questions, comments from council? Go ahead,
Unless
Councillor
you've
Sutton.
got some, Mayor Swain?
Oh, I'm okay, I can
you?
wait it out.
You're just
Go
going to
ahead.
relax tonight? Or?
No, I've got some more, so go ahead.
Right. So I just thought I'd point out to the new members of council, we have a tax stabilization fund, and when you put money into that reserve fund, you can use it for getting money back to residents by reducing taxes. So basically, my philosophy is not to take all this, if we get new income, like for new development and so on, my philosophy is you don't automatically make sure every single cent stays with the district. It goes into this reserve, goes into that reserve. We have to make sure we maximize benefit for residents, and that is to allow them to keep as much money as possible for their kids' university, for their own family budgets. So I just thought I'd point that out, that we do have a mechanism if we get extra income to get it back to residents. And the other one that Councillor Jones brought up, which I'm very high on, and that is this green infrastructure. It's becoming very common. It's been the topic at all past 3 UBCMs, and it's very innovative, and we've had lots of workshops on it, and it's an absolute given that it brings money into the community, saves you money. So I dare say we need, with our planning, as well as just planning neighborhood layouts and that sort of thing, is that we also need more financial balance in our planning. So we need better cash amenities. One example is cash in lieu only gives us 40% of the market value of the land. And this land we could acquire as parkland, minimum 5%. It can go right up to 10, 15, 20% when they're rezoning. This is bringing more money into the district because it mitigates drainage, mitigates rain runoff, cleans the air, just for 3 examples, and curbs and sidewalks, this new style of roads we seem to be introducing, that also is costing us money because it traps the water on the road, feeds it into the big pipes, and so on. Whereas we leave our roads the rural style, all that road runoff goes back into nature. It goes into the green space on the edge of the road and sinks down into our water table, saving us money. Those are just very minor examples of how we've got to start integrating our planning designs and our approach to new development with finances in mind and also green infrastructure in mind. So I certainly agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions, comments?
Your worship, if I can just clarify one thing.
Sure, go ahead.
The tax stabilization reserve actually is the reserve that the contribution for the election goes to. My understanding is not that reserve is, it's not a statutory reserve. And I don't believe it is intended to refund monies to residents or taxpayers, as Councillor Savage had mentioned. I've never heard of a municipality. We don't collect more than what we need. So I've never heard of a municipality rebating municipal property taxes. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification. The only contribution that I've seen going to that reserve has been the contribution for the municipal election.
Gotcha. Yeah, our previous director of finance said that was something that could be used for reducing taxes. You don't send the rebate, you just use it to reduce the tax amount by paying for other things, operating costs and so on. That was what I was told, so.
No, it's actually the word stabilization is in there. So it's there to stabilize taxes so you don't have swings in taxes from year to year. Just to clarify, it's to keep taxes even over time rather than having big swings, because you wouldn't want to levy 40,000 in an election year and then not levy for it in the 3 subsequent years. And then otherwise you'd have great big swing in the year of an election. So the word stabilization is you stabilize taxes by contributing to this reserve on an annual basis to fund those costs in an anomaly or irregular year when you have expenditures.
All right, Councillor Lerner and then Councillor Jones.
Thank you. A question for the director regarding the library levy. I just want to understand correctly because I will be at the library meeting, the Virl meeting in December to represent Lantzville. And so I just want to understand our library levy, that $221,700, that is the amount that the taxpayers of Lantzville pay in library fees each year, or that they did in 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the library levies that amount to us, and we levy it to the residents. So it is like the other taxing authorities that I had shown in that chart earlier. I had just included it in this presentation so that council would be aware. A lot of other municipalities do include the library levy there, and it is a type of service when we're doing our provincial LGDE reporting, where recreation and library costs are combined together. So, but to the point that you raised, Councillor, it is a levy from the library, and then we collect it and remit it to the library.
Excellent, thank you. No, that's perfect, because when we talk about getting what we're paying for, it just gives me an idea of where to start when I'm discussing that at the library board. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Okay, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Director Hare. Yes, I would like to ask a couple more questions along the same vein as the natural assets discussion. And This is simply because we all know we're living in a time of climate change. And Lantzville potentially could become a leading edge community for sustainable and climate resilient infrastructure. So you've answered my question, thank you, about whether or not we are now valuing our natural assets. My question following up to that concerns other types of assets that fall into the category of green infrastructure. There are two of those in general. We might call one of them enhanced assets. Those are things like rain gardens and bioswales, adding urban trees for shading and cooling around new buildings, stormwater ponds, those things, as you know, I'm sure, and engineered assets, which would be things like permeable pavement surfaces, green roofs, rain barrels, green walls, cisterns, those things. My question is, are we at this point in time looking at the enhanced and the engineered assets and how they are being used in Lantzville and starting to value their contribution to our green infrastructure and our management systems?
I don't believe we are at this time. I would have to consult with our director of engineering on that. I mean, engineering assets, we are taking them into consideration in our asset management models, but we would need more condition and risk information to properly account for them and how they would impact the ongoing maintenance costs and replacement cost of our other assets. So we would have to, I'd have to confer with our director of engineering on that.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about this then in the future.
Okay, I just had a couple of quick comments, more than anything. So just in reference to the foothills, as we've heard in the previous term, they're probably not looking at breaking ground to 2024. So any of those financial amenity contributions, I think in the neighborhood of 9,200, probably wouldn't be realized until they start actually breaking ground in their next phase. So, and again, they're going to break ground in, sounds like 2024. So it's going to be a bit of time until we have that happening. However, with the Clark Med subdivision, they may be moving sooner than that, and hopefully, they'll have shovels in the ground and start moving that project forward. But my question through to Director Hare is that if as soon as they start making improvements on that property, so putting in, it could be anything from the stormwater management and so on, is that also calculated into the as a land improvement? Therefore, their assessment on the property prior to subdivision would be going up through BC assessment?
I would have to follow up with BC assessment. I don't know what BC assessment rules are on that. I can follow up with BC assessment and get back to you on that.
And I think further to that, I think once there has been rezoning and so forth and OCP amendments, I think the valuation of the property goes up, but I could be mistaken on that.
I understand that as well. When rezonings occur, BC assessment is made aware of that, and they do adjust the market values or the assessed values of those properties, as far as I'm aware.
So the valuation will be slightly going up and resulting in some interim, increases in taxation. But anyways, just something to make note of. And then my only other comment really has to do around the percent of taxation, and it's more of a political thing than anything. So when, taxes go up in Lantzville, obviously it's always at a higher percentage than other municipalities and, really looking at Nanaimo. And, but when you actually crunch the numbers and look at the dollar amounts for the average house, we end up being pretty close to what Nanaimo or other neighboring municipalities will have in their actual tax or their actual dollar amounts. My concern always lies with just when we look at the overall amount of expenditure for the municipality, how is that number changing? Because I know in my household, growing at greater than, say, having expenses more than 5% every year definitely outpaces my income. So I just think we have to be very cognizant of how these eventual increases are outpacing perhaps people's income levels. And you know, it's one thing we can talk about percentages and this and that, but when we really get down to the brass tacks of it and look at the dollar amounts and so on, I think most people would probably agree that these increases at the municipal level are outpacing our income levels, or the increases in our income levels. The only other thing to comment on is with respect to the overall tax bill, as Director Hare has already indicated, for 2022, 38% of the tax bill was from Lantzville taxation. And then the rest of the bill is left to other things like the RDN and the hospital and other entities that also take from our wallets. But the thing to point out is, or I wanted to point out, as the RDN representative, the representatives do have input into that. So we can help decrease or offset the costing, or taxation that's coming from other levels as well. So and that's part of the reason why there is representation from here, from Lantzville, as well as from the other municipalities and electoral areas, is we have input on the other parts of the tax bill. And probably the one we have the least amount of input on really is policing. And then a second to that would be the school board. But when it comes to, the hospital board and so on, and looking at even things like transit through the RDN and solid waste management and just to name a few, we can have impact at the board level and keeping the level of taxation from those services at a reasonable level, if that's what the board's will is, right? So just like it's going to be council's will in determining what the overall tax requisition is going to be in the District of Lantzville. So those are just some of my comments. I'll keep going around the horn. And Director Mundell, and then Councillor Savage. Or sorry, did I say director? Sorry, Councillor Mundell. My
Gave me a
mistake.
promotion.
Sorry.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Director Hare. Just a question on page 6, the first paragraph at the bottom. You have a note there that says the changes basically in individual property taxes, which result from the redistribution of taxes based on the assessed value, does not generate any additional revenue to the municipality. Could you clarify that a little bit more for me? So as people's valuation fluctuates with what's happening in the market, does the assessed value, when it does rise, you're stating here that it does not generate extra revenue for the municipality?
Sorry, which part of my report are you looking at, Councillor Mundell, or what page?
So this is
page
the
six?
back page, or it says 5 of 5, but there's a little P6.
Oh, it's on 5 of 5. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to theoretically. Oh, okay, I see the section that you're looking at.
Yeah, could you just clarify? I'm
Okay, so let's say let's say council were to say we're having a 0% increase in taxes. Okay, that doesn't mean that individual property owners' taxes will not change, because part of the property taxes that we collect, so property taxes will be redistributed based on how people's assessments change in relative to other people's assessments. So essentially, a taxpayer could see an increase in their property tax bill because the assessed value of their property went up by more than the average of others. If everybody's assessment went up by the average amount, then nobody's taxes would go up. But some people go up by more than the average and other people's taxes go up, or other assessments rather. Some people's assessments go up by more than the average. Others will go up by less than the average. So then there'll be a redistribution of taxes. So overall, the municipality will still collect the same amount of money, but to the individual taxpayer, it'll look like they're having to pay more to the municipality And they are. They're paying more to the municipality, but as an offset, somebody else is paying less because of the redistribution. Did I kind of explain that clearly?
Yes, I think I've got that. Thank you.
And just as a side note, I think one of the things that really influences that is if you have recent sales in your neighborhood. So that's usually ends up being a negative thing to you, because then all of a sudden there's current market value in your specific neighborhood, and generally that's going to result in your own assessment going up. And even as Director Hare indicated, if there's a 0% tax increase, but in that year relative to everybody else, you'll end up probably paying more tax. Anyways, just as a side note, Director Coates, and then
Yes, I had two things. One is, I think that I should have mentioned at the front that we have the solicitor zooming in at 7 to do, when we go into adjourn the meeting and have our orientation session. And then the second thing was, I think Director Hare was going to highlight a correction on page 5
Oh,
on the 93%, so I could note that in the minutes.
thank you for mentioning that, Counts, Trudy. So on page 5 in the third paragraph, I believe the second sentence I had said, while 93% of the assessed values for properties in Lantzville is a residential class, that should say 97%.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Coates.
All right, so Councillor Savage, I know you had your hand up. Is it something?
Oh, yeah, everything I say is extremely important, so.
No, I mean quick.
Yes, quick and important. All right, here we go. Now, since we're on this topic, you got to really get this because it's extremely important. And we're on this topic of assessed value, and this comes back to what I was saying about planning. We have to take into consideration the financial aspect of planning. Now, the higher the tax assessed value compared to all the other properties in Lantzville, the more you'll be paying, the more of the equal share you'll be paying, and the lower the price of your home, you'll be paying less than your equal share of taxes. So when we're planning, if we have nothing but this David Eby idea of sweet, 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 sweets, plus if we have nothing but much lower cost homes, the ratio you become with the high valued home goes up and up and up, which means you'll be paying more and more and more of your equal share of the tax, middle tax rate. So that's why it's extremely important in planning not to get too lopsided with all these suites and all these low cost homes, because the people with average homes now, your share of the taxes will go up and up and up every year. So that's another example of how the assessed value works. And the last quick point is if we have a 10% increase this year in our taxes, that's on top of the 68% compounded tax increase of last term, which means, in fact, it's a 16.8% increase in taxes. That's how this stuff gets right away from you and why it just drowns people. So I'm aiming for a 0% tax increase, just me personally, this year. And to Director Hare, last question, please. Could you give us an indication of what we're looking at for a tax increase 2023? You must have some idea at this point.
I think you need to look at the entire budget package before receiving that information. You'll receive that information on Monday. So no, I cannot give that to you at this point in time.
What about the dollar amount increase, tax acquisition?
As I mentioned to Councillor Savage, it'll come to you on Monday.
Well, wait with bated breath. Okay, so again, I appreciate you taking the time this evening, Director Hare, to walk us through that. I mean, there'll be, I'm sure, more of that in the coming weeks or through the rest of November. But again, thank you. And at this point, we've made it through our agenda, so I declare the meeting adjourned. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.